Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. Nathaniel Carter stared at his reflection in the elevator's polished doors, adjusting his charcoal gray tie for the 10th time. At 42, his face showed subtle signs of a decade spent in self-imposed isolation, faint lines around his eyes, and a perpetual crease across his forehead that spoke of countless nights spent alone in his Boston apartment, drowning in spreadsheets and missed opportunities. "You need this," he muttered to himself, echoing the words his best friend Daniel had used to convince him to agree to this blind date on New Year's Eve. The prestigious Beacon Hill restaurant, Velour, wasn't his usual scene, but Daniel had insisted it was perfect for new beginnings. The elevator doors opened to reveal the restaurant's elegant interior, where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory linens. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the Boston skyline sparkled with anticipation of the coming midnight hour. Nathaniel checked his watch. 10:45 p.m., early as usual. The maitre d' led him to a corner table with a spectacular view of the Charles River. "Your guest hasn't arrived yet, sir," he said, pulling out a chair. "Would you like to order a drink while you wait?" Nathaniel ordered a bourbon neat, hoping it would calm his nerves. As he waited, his mind wandered to the brief description Daniel had given him about his date. Eleanor Hayes, 39, a corporate lawyer who'd recently made partner at her firm. "She's brilliant, Daniel had said with a knowing smile, "and exactly what you need to shake up your world." The bourbon arrived, and Nathaniel took a careful sip, letting the warm liquid settle his thoughts. He'd almost convinced himself to leave. What was he thinking? Starting something new at his age? When movement at the restaurant's entrance caught his eye, she walked in like a breath of fresh air in a room that suddenly felt too small. Eleanor wore a deep emerald dress that complemented her dark skin perfectly, her natural hair styled in elegant twists that framed her face. But it was her smile, bright and genuine, as she spoke to the maitre d' that made Nathaniel's heart skip a beat. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, time seemed to suspend. Eleanor's smile widened slightly, recognition flickering in her eyes. Daniel must have shown her his picture. As she approached the table, Nathaniel stood, nearly knocking over his bourbon in his haste. "You must be Nathaniel," she said, her voice warm and rich with a hint of amusement at his clumsiness. "I'm Eleanor." "The pleasure's mine," Nathaniel managed, pulling out her chair. As she sat, he caught a whiff of her perfume, something subtle and sophisticated that reminded him of lavender on a summer evening. "Daniel told me you'd be punctual," Eleanor said, settling into her seat. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting long." "Not at all," Nathaniel replied, finding his voice. "I've only just arrived myself." It was a small lie, but one that felt kind in the moment. Their conversation began tentatively, like most first meetings between strangers. But as they ordered their meals, she chose the duck confit. He, the beef bourguignon. Something shifted. Eleanor had a way of speaking that made every word feel important, every story worth telling. "So Nathaniel," she said, taking a sip of her wine, "what made you agree to a blind date on New Year's Eve? It's either very brave or slightly desperate." Her eyes twinkled with gentle teasing. Nathaniel chuckled, surprising himself with how genuine it felt. Perhaps a bit of both. Daniel can be very persistent when he wants to be. "That he can," Eleanor agreed. "He and I went to law school together. He's been trying to set me up with P-perfect guy for months now." She raised an eyebrow. "Apparently, you're it." There was something in her tone, not quite skepticism, but careful consideration that made Nathaniel lean forward. "And what's your verdict so far?" Eleanor studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "The jury's still out," she said finally, but her smile softened the words. "Though I appreciate a man who can laugh at himself." As their meals arrived, their conversation deepened. Nathaniel found himself sharing stories he hadn't thought about in years, about growing up in suburban Massachusetts, about his dreams of becoming a novelist, before practicality led him to financial consulting, about the quiet life he'd built that somehow felt emptier with each passing year. Eleanor listened intently, offering insights that showed she understood more than just his words. When she spoke about her own journey, the challenges she'd faced as a black woman in corporate law, the determination that had driven her to succeed, the family that had supported her every step of the way, Nathaniel found himself drawn not just to her words, but to the strength behind them. It wasn't easy, she said, describing her first year as an associate. There were plenty of people who assumed I was the paralegal or the assistant. But every assumption they made became fuel for me to prove them wrong. Nathaniel nodded, feeling a mix of admiration and discomfort. I can't imagine, he said softly, then immediately worried it was the wrong thing to say. But Eleanor's expression remained open. No, you probably can't, she agreed. But you're listening, really listening. That's more than most people do. Outside, premature fireworks began to streak across the sky, their colors reflecting in the windows. Nathaniel realized with a start that they'd been talking for nearly 2 hours. The restaurant had filled up around them, the energy building as midnight approached. Should we order dessert? He asked, not ready for the evening to end. Eleanor glanced at her watch, then back at him with a smile that made his pulse quicken. I think we should. After all, we still have plenty of time before midnight, and I want to hear more about this novel you never wrote. As their waiter cleared their plates, Nathaniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of possibility, the sense that maybe, just maybe, life still held surprises worth discovering. And as Eleanor launched into a story about her first case as a lawyer, her hands animated and her eyes bright, he found himself hoping that this surprise might be the beginning of something extraordinary. The chocolate souffle arrived at their table, just as another burst of fireworks illuminated the Boston skyline. Eleanor's eyes sparkled in the reflected light, and Nathaniel found himself mesmerized by how the golden glow played across her features. They'd been talking for hours, yet time seemed to flow like honey, sweet and unhurried. So, Eleanor said, taking a delicate bite of the souffle, you never answered my question about the novel. What was it about? Nathaniel shifted in his seat, feeling unexpectedly vulnerable. It was about second chances, actually. A man who discovers that all the moments he thought he'd wasted in his life were actually leading him somewhere important. He paused, suddenly self-conscious. It sounds cliché when I say it out loud. No, Eleanor responded thoughtfully, setting down her spoon. It sounds honest. Sometimes the most universal stories are the ones we're afraid to tell. She tilted her head, studying him. What happened to it? Life happened. Or rather, fear disguised as practicality. Nathaniel took a sip of his water, gathering his thoughts. I was 28, working at my first consulting job. The novel was half finished when I got offered a promotion. The choice seemed clear at the time, stability over uncertainty. And now? Now I wonder if I chose wrong. Nathaniel surprised himself with his candor. Something about Eleanor made him want to be honest, even about the parts of himself he usually kept hidden. Eleanor nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. I almost left law school after my first year, she revealed. The pressure was intense, and there were days when I felt like an outsider in every room I entered. But my grandmother, she changed my perspective. How so? She told me about her mother, my great-grandmother, who cleaned houses in segregated Virginia to put her children through school. She said, "Baby, when you feel like giving up, remember you're standing on shoulders that never broke." Eleanor's voice carried a quiet pride. Those words got me through a lot of tough days. Nathaniel absorbed this, feeling the weight of history and perseverance in her words. Your grandmother sounds remarkable. She is. She still lives in Virginia, in the same house where she raised my father and his sisters, actually. Eleanor paused, a small laugh escaping her. She'd love this restaurant. She always said good food makes for honest conversation. As if on cue, their waiter appeared to clear the dessert plates. Midnight is in 30 minutes, he informed them. We'll be serving champagne on the terrace for the countdown, if you'd like to join the celebration. They exchanged glances, and Nathaniel felt a flutter of anticipation. Shall we? He asked, standing and offering his hand. The terrace was already filling with other guests, the December air crisp but not unbearable. Heat lamps created warm pockets of comfort, and strings of white lights twinkled overhead. Nathaniel led them to a quiet corner, with a view of both the river and the city skyline. I have a confession to make, Eleanor said, as they settled into their spot. I almost canceled tonight. Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. Why didn't you? Because I saw something in Daniel's eyes when he talked about you. Not just the usual matchmaking excitement, but genuine belief that we might understand each other. She turned to face him fully. He mentioned you lost someone too. The words hit Nathaniel like a physical force. He hadn't expected this conversation, not tonight, but looking at Eleanor's open, empathetic expression, He found himself wanting to share. "My sister," he said quietly. "Amelia. 10 years ago. Car accident." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a decade's grief. Eleanor's hand found his on the terrace railing, warm and steady. "My husband," she said softly. "Julian. 8 years ago. Heart condition no one knew about. He was only 34. The revelation settled between them like a bridge connecting their separate islands of loss." Nathaniel gently squeezed her hand, understanding now why this evening felt different from any other first date he'd been on. "Is that why you withdrew?" Eleanor asked, her question gentle but direct. "Yes, though I didn't realize that's what I was doing at first. It just seemed easier to focus on work, to keep everyone at arm's length." Nathaniel watched a boat glide across the dark water below. "What about you?" "I did the opposite. Threw myself into everything: work, family, friends. Kept myself so busy, I didn't have time to feel the emptiness." Eleanor's voice carried no bitterness, only reflection. "It took me years to realize that running forward is still running." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of champagne flutes, passed out by servers weaving through the crowd. The terrace had filled completely now, the air buzzing with anticipation as midnight approached. "You know what Julian used to say?" Eleanor continued, accepting her glass. "He said life's biggest moments always come disguised as ordinary days. You never know when a random Tuesday might change everything." Nathaniel felt the truth of those words resonating with his own unfinished novel. "Or a New Year's Eve blind date," he added softly. Eleanor's smile in response was radiant. "Or that." Around them, people began counting down 60 seconds to midnight. Nathaniel turned to face Eleanor fully, struck by how comfortable he felt in her presence, how natural it seemed to share these deep parts of himself. "Eleanor," he began, his heart racing slightly. "I know we've only just met, but I feel it too," she interrupted, her eyes meeting his with startling directness. "This connection, it's different." The crowd reached 30 seconds. The city seemed to hold its breath. "Maybe," Nathaniel said, choosing his words carefully, "some stories don't need to stay unfinished." 20 seconds. Eleanor stepped closer, her free hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. "Maybe some beginnings are worth the risk." 10 seconds. The air crackled with possibility. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As the crowd erupted in cheers and the sky exploded with fireworks, Nathaniel and Eleanor turned to each other. There was no awkwardness, no uncertainty. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor's eyes were shining. "Happy New Year, Nathaniel," she whispered. "Happy New Year," he replied, his hand finding hers again. Above them, the fireworks painted the sky in brilliant colors, but Nathaniel couldn't take his eyes off the woman before him. In her face, he saw possibilities he'd thought long buried, chances for joy, for connection, for writing new stories. As the celebration continued around them, they stayed in their quiet corner, talking, laughing, sharing more stories. Neither wanted the night to end, both sensing that this wasn't just a successful blind date or a pleasant New Year's Eve. This was the beginning of something profound, a story that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to begin. The first morning of the new year dawned crisp, clear over Boston. Nathaniel sat at his kitchen counter, coffee untouched, staring at the business card. Eleanor had pressed into his hand before they parted ways. Her cell phone number was written on the back in elegant script, along with a small note, "For when you're ready to continue our story." His phone buzzed Daniel, calling for the third time since dawn. Nathaniel finally answered, unable to keep the smile from his voice. "You're up early for someone who hosted a New Year's party. And you're avoiding my calls for someone who owes me the biggest thank you of his life," Daniel countered. "Come on, man, how did it go?" Nathaniel leaned back, memories of the previous night washing over him. It was unexpected. Unexpected good or unexpected disaster? Good. Really good. Nathaniel paused, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound trite. "She's remarkable, Daniel, but no buts. I hear that tone in your voice. You're already overthinking this." Nathaniel stood, pacing his apartment's hardwood floors. "I told her about Amelia." Silence on the other end, then, softly, "You haven't talked about Amelia with anyone new in years." "I know. And she told me about her husband, Julian. We connected over it, but now I'm wondering if that's healthy, starting something new on the foundation of old grief." Daniel's voice grew serious. "When I suggested this setup, it wasn't random. Eleanor understands loss, in a way few people do. But more importantly, she understands how to live beyond it, something you're still learning. Before Nathaniel could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. His heart leapt when he saw Eleanor's name. "She just texted me," he told Daniel. "Then hang up and answer her. You idiot!" "And Nathaniel, don't mess this up by hiding behind your fears." The call ended, and Nathaniel opened Eleanor's message. "Can't stop thinking about our conversation. Lunch today? I know a great Ethiopian place in Cambridge." His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of him wanted to make an excuse, to retreat to the safety of his routine. But Eleanor's words from last night echoed in his mind. Running forward is still running. He typed back, "I'd love to. Send me the address." 3 hours later, Nathaniel pushed open the door to Addis Red Sea restaurant. The rich aroma of spices enveloped him as he spotted Eleanor at a corner table. She'd traded her evening wear for dark jeans and a white sweater that complemented her skin tone perfectly. Her smile when she saw him made his hesitations from the morning seem foolish. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted, as he sat down. "The light of day has a way of making midnight conversations feel surreal." "I almost talked myself out of it," Nathaniel replied honestly. "Old habits die hard." "Tell me about these habits," Eleanor said, leaning forward. "What does Nathaniel Carter do when he's not having deep conversations with strangers on New Year's Eve?" As they ordered, Eleanor choosing dishes for them both with practiced ease, Nathaniel described his life, the consulting firm where he'd worked for 12 years, his weekly dinner with Daniel's family, the running route along the Charles River that never varied. "It sounds structured," Eleanor observed, tearing a piece of injera bread. "Safe. That's a diplomatic way of putting it." "I understand the appeal of structure," she said. "After Julian died, I created so many routines just to keep moving forward. But eventually, I realized they were becoming walls instead of support beams." Nathaniel watched as she expertly scooped up some spiced lentils with the bread. "How did you break free?" "Slowly. Intentionally. I started saying yes to things that scared me." She met his eyes. Like blind dates on New Year's Eve, their food arrived, creating a natural pause in the conversation. As Eleanor showed him how to eat properly with the injera, their hands brushed, sending a current of electricity through Nathaniel's arm. "There's something I need to tell you," Eleanor said suddenly, setting down her bread. "About last night. When I mentioned my grandmother's house in Virginia, it triggered a memory I can't shake." Nathaniel felt a shift in the air, a tension he couldn't name. "What kind of memory?" "The house is in Winchester, on Maple Street. 10 years ago, there was a car accident right in front of it. My grandmother was the first person on the scene." Eleanor's eyes held his, gentle but intense. "Nathaniel, what was your sister's name again?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Amelia," he whispered. "The accident was in Winchester, on Maple Street." Eleanor reached across the table, taking his trembling hand. "My grandmother still talks about that night, about the young woman in the blue Honda Civic, about how she held her hand and prayed with her until the ambulance came." Nathaniel's vision blurred. For 10 years, he'd wondered about those final moments, about whether Amelia had been alone and afraid. The official report had mentioned a witness, an elderly woman who'd stayed with her, but he'd never known more than that. "Your grandmother," he managed, his voice thick. "What's her name?" "Clara." "Clara Hayes." The name hit him like a physical force. Amelia's last words, according to the paramedics, had been "Tell Clara thank you." Nathaniel had always assumed it was meant for their cousin Clara in Seattle. "She pressed her favorite quilt against the wound," Eleanor continued softly. "It was yellow, with purple flowers. She never got it back from the paramedics, but she never complained. She just said she hoped it brought some comfort in those moments." Nathaniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed. "I found that quilt in Amelia's personal effects. It's been in my closet for 10 years. I never knew where it came from, or what it meant." The restaurant continued its lunchtime bustle around them, but in their corner, time seemed to stand still. When Nathaniel opened his eyes again, he found Eleanor watching him with a mixture of compassion and wonder. "What are the odds?" he whispered. "My grandmother would say there are no odds, only divine orchestration." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Maybe she's right. Maybe some connections are written in the stars long before we understand them." Nathaniel felt tears threatening and took a deep breath. "I've spent 10 years wondering about those final moments, feeling guilty that I wasn't there. Knowing your grandmother was with her, that she wasn't alone." He trailed off, unable to continue. "Come to Virginia with me," Eleanor said suddenly. "Meet her. She'd love to talk to you about Amelia, to share her memories of that night." The invitation hung between them, heavy with possibility and terror. It was too fast, too intense, too real. Every instinct Nathaniel had developed over the past decade screamed at him to retreat, to protect himself from this overwhelming connection. But looking at Eleanor, seeing the strength and understanding in her eyes, Nathaniel felt something shift inside him. Maybe some stories didn't need to stay unfinished. Maybe some connections were meant to heal more than just romantic loneliness. "Yes," he heard himself say, "I'd like that." Eleanor's brilliant smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. As they finished their meal, making tentative plans for a weekend trip to Winchester, Nathaniel realized that his carefully structured life was about to change dramatically. The thought, for the first time in years, didn't terrify him. Instead, it felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of vivid color, a world where coincidences could be miracles, where past pain could create bridges to future joy, and where a blind date on New Year's Eve could open doors he'd thought permanently closed. 3 days after their Ethiopian lunch, Nathaniel stood in front of his bedroom closet, staring at the yellow quilt with purple flowers. For a decade, it had remained folded and untouched, a mysterious relic of his sister's final moments. Now, knowing its origin, he couldn't stop running his fingers over the worn fabric, imagining Clara Hayes's hands pressing it against Amelia's wounds, offering comfort in those last precious minutes. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor, flight options for Friday-Sunday, early morning or afternoon departure. The reality of their planned trip to Virginia hit him anew. Everything was moving so fast, like a river breaking through a dam, yet somehow it didn't feel wrong, just terrifyingly right. As he contemplated his response, another text arrived. Having second thoughts, Nathaniel smiled despite himself. In just a few days, Eleanor had already learned to read him well. He pressed the call button instead of texting back. "I'm not having second thoughts," he said when she answered. "I'm having all the thoughts simultaneously." Eleanor's warm laugh filled his ear. "Want to talk about it over dinner? I'm finishing up at the office in an hour. Your office is downtown, right?" "I know a place nearby the Harbor Kitchen, actually." Eleanor paused. "I was thinking somewhere less formal. My place, I make a mean jerk chicken, and we should probably talk about what to expect in Virginia without an audience." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. Dinner at her home felt like crossing another threshold, making this connection even more real. "I'd like that," he heard himself say. "Text me your address." "Already did. See you at 7. After hanging up, Nathaniel found her address in his messages. Her apartment was in a historic building in Back Bay, just a few blocks from the public garden. He knew the area well. It was part of his running route, though he'd never paid much attention to the residents coming and going through the elegant brownstone entrances. At precisely 7 o'clock, Nathaniel stood outside Eleanor's door, a bottle of wine in one hand and the yellow quilt carefully folded in a canvas bag in the other. The door opened before he could knock, releasing the mouth-watering aroma of Caribbean spices. "You brought the quilt," Eleanor said softly, noticing the bag. Her eyes held a mixture of tenderness and concern. "I thought maybe it should go back to your grandmother." Eleanor stepped aside to let him in, touching his arm gently as he passed. "Let's talk about that over dinner." Her apartment was a perfect reflection of her personality. Warm, sophisticated, and full of character. African art pieces shared space with legal books and family photos. Large windows offered a view of the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Wine openers in the drawer by the fridge," Eleanor called from the kitchen. "Make yourself useful while I finish up here." The easy domesticity of the moment struck Nathaniel how natural it felt to move around her kitchen, finding glasses, opening wine, falling into step beside her as she checked the chicken in the oven. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional questions about wine preferences and plate locations. Once they were seated at her small dining table, the quilt resting on a nearby chair like a silent witness, Eleanor finally addressed the elephant in the room. "You're worried about meeting my grandmother," she stated, not a question. Nathaniel nodded, taking a sip of wine to gather his thoughts. What if it's too much for her? I mean, dredging up memories of that night? "Nathaniel," Eleanor set down her fork, "my grandmother has prayed for your family every single day for the past 10 years. She keeps a photo of Amelia from the newspaper article in her Bible. Meeting you won't dredge up memories, it will answer prayers." Tears pricked at Nathaniel's eyes. "I didn't know." I never knew anyone else carried her memory like that. That's who my grandmother is. She believes in connections, in the sacred duty of bearing witness to both joy and sorrow. Eleanor reached across the table, taking his hand. But if you're not ready, we can wait. No. Nathaniel squeezed her hand. I need to do this. For Amelia, for your grandmother, for myself. He paused, gathering courage. And for us. The word us hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Eleanor's smile was radiant. Tell me about her, she said softly. Tell me about Amelia. So he did. Over jerk chicken and wine, Nathaniel shared stories he hadn't told anyone in years, about Amelia's infectious laugh, her dream of becoming a marine biologist, her terrible singing voice that never stopped her from belting out songs in the car. Eleanor listened with her whole being, asking questions that showed she truly wanted to know this woman who had unknowingly connected their lives a decade ago. As the evening wore on, they moved to Eleanor's comfortable couch, the city lights creating a cozy backdrop. The yellow quilt now lay across their laps, a bridge between past and present. What are you thinking? Eleanor asked, noticing Nathaniel's distant expression. I'm thinking about parallel lives, he said slowly. How 10 years ago, while I was shutting down and pushing everyone away, your grandmother was praying for me. How you were learning to live with your own loss, while I was hiding from mine. How all these threads were weaving together without us knowing. Eleanor shifted closer, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. My mother always says that healing isn't linear. Sometimes it spirals, bringing us back to old wounds so we can finally clean them properly. Is that what this is? Healing? I think, Eleanor said carefully. It's whatever we choose to make it. But yes, I feel something healing when I'm with you. Something I didn't even know was still broken. Nathaniel turned to look at her, struck by the vulnerability in her voice. Without conscious thought, he leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that felt like both a question and an answer. Eleanor responded with equal tenderness, her hand coming up to cup his face. When they finally parted, Eleanor's eyes were shining with unshed tears. We should probably book those flights, she whispered against his lips. Nathaniel laughed softly, the sound full of joy and terror and hope. Early morning, he decided. I want as much time as possible. I'll book them tonight. Eleanor sat up, reaching for her laptop, but Nathaniel caught her hand. Wait, he said. Just stay here a moment longer. I want to remember this exactly as it is. Eleanor settled back against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, the yellow quilt warm across their laps, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, and the future stretching out before them like an unwritten story waiting to begin. The evening ended with careful plans and tender goodbyes, both of them aware that their weekend in Virginia would change everything. As Nathaniel walked home through the quiet streets of Boston, he felt lighter than he had in years, as if the weight of unresolved grief was finally beginning to lift, making space for something new to grow in its place. Friday morning dawned gray and misty over Logan Airport. Nathaniel arrived early, as usual, the yellow quilt carefully packed in his carry-on bag. He found Eleanor already waiting at their gate, 2 coffee cups in hand. One black, no sugar, she said, offering him a cup. You look like a black coffee kind of guy. You're becoming dangerously good at reading me, Nathaniel replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending familiar sparks through his system. About that, Eleanor said, her tone growing serious as they found seats near the window. There's something we should discuss before we land in Virginia. Nathaniel felt his stomach tighten. What is it? My family. Eleanor paused, choosing her words carefully. They're not just excited about me bringing someone home. They're excited about me bringing you home. Clara has told them about our connection, and they see it as something divine. And you're worried about the pressure that puts on us? I'm worried about the pressure it puts on you, Eleanor corrected. My family is warm, loving, and completely overwhelming. They'll want to embrace you as one of their own immediately. If that's too much, Nathaniel reached over and took her hand, surprising them both with his directness. Eleanor, I've spent 10 years keeping everyone at arm's length. Maybe it's time to let people in. Her smile was like sunshine breaking through the morning mist. Before she could respond, the boarding call came for their flight. The plane ride to Virginia passed in comfortable conversation and shared silences. Nathaniel found himself studying Eleanor's profile as she read a legal brief, struck by how natural it felt to be traveling with her, how right it seemed to be crossing this threshold together. As they descended into Dulles International Airport, Eleanor gripped his hand tightly. Ready? No, Nathaniel admitted, but I want to be. They rented a car for the drive to Winchester, Eleanor taking the wheel since she knew the route. As they left the D.C. suburbs behind, the landscape opened up into rolling hills and farmland. The January sky hung low and heavy with the promise of snow. Tell me about the house, Nathaniel said as they turned onto Interstate 81, the one where Amelia's accident happened. Eleanor finished gently. It's a Victorian home, painted yellow with white trim. My grandfather bought it in the 60s, when banks were finally allowing black families to get mortgages in that neighborhood. He passed away 15 years ago, but Clara never considered moving. She says the house has a purpose. Nathaniel absorbed this information, imagining a young Clara Hayes making a home in Winchester during the Civil Rights era. She sounds remarkable. She is. But Nathaniel, Eleanor glanced at him briefly before returning her eyes to the road. She might cry when she sees you. She might want to hug you. She might tell you things about that night that are hard to hear. Are you prepared for that? I've spent 10 years not knowing, Nathaniel replied softly. Not knowing if Amelia was scared, if she was in pain, if she knew she was loved in those final moments. Whatever your grandmother tells me, I need to hear it. Eleanor reached over and squeezed his hand, saying nothing. They drove in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As the miles rolled by, they finally exited the interstate, following smaller roads into Winchester. The town was a mix of historic charm and modern development, with brick sidewalks and colonial architecture alongside contemporary shops and restaurants. That's the hospital, Eleanor said quietly, as they passed a large medical complex. Where they took her, Nathaniel nodded, unable to speak. They turned onto Maple Street, and his heart began to race. The houses here were grand old ladies, each with its own distinctive character. Then he saw it, the yellow Victorian with white trim, exactly as Eleanor had described. As they pulled into the driveway, Nathaniel noticed an elderly woman standing on the wraparound porch. Even at a distance, her bearing was regal, her silver hair crowned with a deep purple head wrap that matched her dress. That's Clara, Eleanor whispered unnecessarily. She's been watching for us since dawn. Nathaniel's hands trembled as he reached for his bag, feeling the weight of the quilt inside. Clara descended the porch steps with remarkable grace for her age, her arms already opening to embrace her granddaughter. Eleanor, baby, her voice carried clearly across the yard. You're home. Mother and granddaughter embraced, and Nathaniel hung back, his heart pounding. Then Clara turned to him, her dark eyes sharp and knowing. Nathaniel Carter, she said softly. I've been praying for this day for 10 years. Before he could respond, she had crossed the space between them and pulled him into a fierce embrace. Nathaniel stiffened for a moment, then melted into it, overwhelmed by the scent of vanilla and herbs that seemed to envelop her. I have your quilt, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Clara pulled back just enough to look into his face, her hand still gripping his arms. Baby, that quilt stopped being mine the moment I wrapped it around your sister. It belongs to your family now. I brought it anyway, Nathaniel persisted. I thought you might want it back. What I want, Clara said firmly, is for you to come inside and let me tell you about your sister's last moments on this earth. She left you a message, Nathaniel. I've been holding it for you all these years. Nathaniel's knees weakened, and he felt Eleanor's steadying hand on his back. Clara noticed the gesture and smiled, a knowing look passing between her and her granddaughter. But first, Clara continued, linking her arm through Nathaniel's, we're going to have some tea, and you're going to tell me about yourself, about what brought you to my Eleanor after all these years. And then maybe we'll talk about how God works in mysterious ways, weaving lives together when we least expect it. As Clara led them up the porch steps, Nathaniel caught Eleanor's eye. She was watching them with a mixture of love and concern, and in that moment, he realized something profound. He wasn't just here to learn about Amelia's last moments. He was here to learn how to live again, how to let love in again, how to believe in connections that defied explanation. The yellow Victorian welcomed them with warmth and the smell of fresh baked bread. As they crossed the threshold, Nathaniel felt something shift inside him, as if a door long locked was finally creaking open, letting in light and air and possibility. Clara settled them in her living room, surrounded by family photos and well-loved furniture. As she bustled about preparing tea, Nathaniel found himself studying a particular photograph on the mantel. A younger Clara, standing proudly in front of this very house, her arms around a young man who must have been Eleanor's father. "Taken the day we bought this house," Clara said, noticing his interest. "The realtor didn't want to sell to us, said the neighbors wouldn't like it. But my Herbert Eleanor's grandfather, he stood his ground, said this house was meant for us." She set down the tea tray with a gentle click. Turned out he was right. "This house has been a sanctuary for more souls than I can count, including your Amelia." Eleanor reached over and took Nathaniel's hand as Clara began to pour the tea. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft and silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was to come. Clara Hayes's living room felt suspended in time as snow fell silently outside the bay windows. Steam rose from delicate teacups, and the yellow quilt lay folded between Nathaniel and Eleanor on the floral sofa. The only sound was the gentle ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. "I remember everything about that night," Clara began, her voice soft but clear. "It was cold, like today. I was up late, reading my Bible. I've always been a night owl." The crash. She paused, her hands tightening around her teacup. It sounded like thunder, but wrong. Too sharp, too close. Nathaniel sat perfectly still, barely breathing. Eleanor's hand found his, warm and anchoring. "I ran outside without even putting on a coat," Clara continued. "The street was dark. The impact had taken out the lamppost, but I could see her car, crumpled against the oak tree." Clara's eyes grew distant with memory. "She was conscious when I reached her. That's important for you to know, Nathaniel. She was afraid, yes, but she was aware. She knew she wasn't alone." A small sound escaped Nathaniel's throat. Clara reached across and took his free hand, her skin soft and warm, like well-worn leather. "The first thing she said to me was, 'I'm Amelia.' Even then, with everything happening, she introduced herself properly. I told her I was Clara, and that help was coming. I'd already called 911 on my house phone before running out." "Did she?" Nathaniel's voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Was she in pain?" "Yes," Clara answered honestly. "But she was strong, so strong. I wrapped my quilt around her. I always keep one by the front door for emergencies." She looked at me and said, "You're an angel." I told her, "No, just a nosy old woman who can't mind her own business." Clara smiled slightly at the memory. That made her laugh, though it hurt her to do it. Eleanor squeezed Nathaniel's hand as tears began rolling down his cheeks. "She talked about you," Clara continued gently. She said, "My brother Nathaniel is going to blame himself." Those were her exact words. She was more worried about you than herself. Nathaniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed. The guilt he'd carried for 10 years for not answering her call that night, for being too busy with work to drive down to Virginia with her as they'd planned crashed over him in waves. "She made me promise to tell you something," Clara said, her voice growing more intense. "Nathaniel, look at me." He opened his eyes, meeting her steady gaze. She said, "Tell Nathaniel it's not his fault. Tell him I was singing that stupid song he hates, the one about the yellow submarine, and I looked down to change the radio station. Tell him he was right about distracted driving, but mostly, tell him I love him, and he has to keep living, really living." The sob that tore from Nathaniel's chest seemed to come from depths he didn't know he possessed. Clara moved to sit beside him, pulling him into her arms like he was a child. He buried his face in her shoulder, breathing in that same vanilla and herb scent, imagining Amelia doing the same in her final moments. "Let it out, baby," Clara murmured, rocking him slightly. "You've held it too long." Through his tears, Nathaniel felt Eleanor's hand rubbing gentle circles on his back. The two women held him as years of pent-up grief poured out, neither rushing him nor trying to diminish his pain. When he finally sat up, wiping his eyes, Clara held his face between her hands. "There's more," she said. "Do you want to hear it now, or do you need a break?" Now Nathaniel managed. "Please." Clara nodded, releasing his face but staying close. "The ambulance was taking too long. I knew it was bad. There was so much blood, even with the quilt, so I did what my mama taught me. I prayed with her, asked her if that was okay, and she said yes. We prayed together, your Amelia and me, right there on Maple Street." She reached for a leather-bound Bible on the side table, opening it to a well-worn page where a newspaper clipping served as a bookmark. Nathaniel recognized the photo it was from Amelia's obituary. She was laughing in it, her blonde hair catching the sun. "She wasn't afraid at the end," Clara said softly. The prayer calmed her. She was holding my hand, and she smiled such a beautiful smile and said, "Clara, I can see the light. It's so warm, Those were her last words. She was still smiling when she left us. Nathaniel, still holding my hand. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't afraid. Through fresh tears, Nathaniel asked. The paramedics said they said she was alone when they arrived. No, Clara said firmly. I was there until they pulled me away to work on her. I fought them, didn't want her to feel abandoned, but she was already gone by then. Gone peacefully, wrapped in love and prayer. Eleanor made a soft sound, and Nathaniel realized she was crying too. He pulled her close with one arm, his other hand still gripped in Clara's. I've lived a long life, Clara continued, her voice taking on a different tone. Seen a lot of death, some peaceful, some not. Your sister's passing was sacred. God sent me out there that night, not just for her, but for you, so that one day you'd know she wasn't scared or alone, so you could finally forgive yourself and start living again. She reached out and touched the yellow quilt. When the paramedics took her away, I didn't even think about the quilt. Didn't occur to me until days later. By then, I figured it had been thrown away. But here it is, coming full circle. And look what else has come full circle. My granddaughter finding you, bringing you home to hear this story. How did you do it? Nathaniel asked suddenly. How did you go on with your life after witnessing something like that? Clara's eyes filled with understanding. The same way I went on after losing my Herbert, after every loss. By believing that love doesn't end with death. By trusting that every connection, even the briefest one, has meaning. Your sister touched my life, Nathaniel. Changed me. Made me believe even more strongly in divine appointments. She glanced meaningfully at where Nathaniel and Eleanor sat, entwined. Some things can't be explained by coincidence. Some connections are written in the stars. The grandfather clock chimed softly, marking the hour. Outside, the snow had picked up, coating Maple Street in a blanket of white. Nathaniel looked out the window at the spot where the old oak tree had stood removed. Years ago, Eleanor had told him, after the accident, in its place was a small garden with a bench. I sit there sometimes, Clara said, following his gaze. Talk to Amelia, tell her about my day, ask her to watch over my family. She smiled at Nathaniel. Lately, I've been telling her about you and Eleanor, asking her to guide you both to healing. Nathaniel turned to look at Eleanor, really look at her. Her eyes were red from crying, but they held such love and strength that it took his breath away. In that moment, he saw their connection through Clara's eyes, not just a chance meeting, not just a romantic possibility, but something sacred, a divine appointment, as Clara would say. Would you like to see the garden? Clara asked gently. I think the snow makes it especially beautiful. Nathaniel nodded, unable to speak. As they rose to go outside, Clara stopped them, wrapping the yellow quilt around both Nathaniel and Eleanor's shoulders. Something old becoming something new, she said softly, just as it should be. The snow continued falling, as Nathaniel and Eleanor sat on the garden bench, the yellow quilt wrapped around their shoulders. Clara had insisted on giving them privacy, claiming she needed to prepare dinner, but Nathaniel suspected she understood their need to process everything together. Look, Eleanor said softly, pointing to a small plaque partially covered by snow. Nathaniel brushed away the white powder to reveal the words, in memory of all those who found peace in this garden. She never forgot her, Nathaniel whispered. All these years, while I was running from Amelia's memory, your grandmother was honoring it. Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. That's who she is. She believes in holding space for both grief and joy. In her mind, they're not opposites, they're partners in the dance of life. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. I've been doing it wrong, he finally said. All these years, I thought moving forward meant leaving Amelia behind. But your grandmother, she shows that it's possible to carry someone's memory and still embrace life. Is that what you want? Eleanor asked carefully. To embrace life again? Nathaniel turned to look at her, struck by how the snowflakes caught in her dark curls, how her brown eyes held such depth of understanding. I think I already am, he said. With you. Eleanor's smile was radiant, but her eyes remained serious. Nathaniel, what Clara told you about Amelia, it's going to take time to process. Are you sure you want to take on a relationship at the same time? I'm sure that I don't want to process it alone, he replied, taking her hand. Unless, are you having doubts? No, Eleanor said quickly. God, no. I know what it's like to have grief resurface. When Julian died, I thought I'd processed it all. Then, 3 years later, something triggered me a song on the radio. I think, and it was like experiencing the loss all over again. I don't want to promise you forever, and then have you realize you need space to heal." Nathaniel squeezed her hand. "What if healing doesn't have to be a solitary process? What if—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What if we heal better together?" A snowflake landed on Eleanor's cheek, melting instantly. Nathaniel reached up to brush away the moisture, but instead found himself cupping her face. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but after spending 10 years trying not to feel anything, I don't want to hide from this feeling. I don't want to analyze it or question it. I just want to be honest about it." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me how right it feels." Their kiss was gentle, tasting of snow and tears and possibility. When they pulled apart, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me about Julian," he said softly. "Not how he died, how he lived. What made you fall in love with him?" Eleanor pulled back slightly, surprised. "You really want to know?" "Yes. He's part of who you are, just like Amelia is part of me. I want to know all of you." Eleanor settled more comfortably against him, adjusting the quilt around them. "He was a middle school teacher," she began, "the kind who stayed late to help struggling students, who remembered every birthday, who believed every child had potential if given the chance. He had this incredible laugh, it would fill up a room, make everyone around him smile automatically." As she spoke, Nathaniel watched her face, noting how it softened with memories but didn't crumple with pain. This, he realized, was what healthy grieving looked like, being able to remember with love instead of agony. "He sounds wonderful," Nathaniel said when she finished. "Thank you for sharing him with me." "Thank you for asking," Eleanor replied. "Most men I've dated either pretend Julian never existed or treat him like competition. You're the first one who's treated him like a part of my story worth knowing. Maybe because I understand now," Nathaniel said thoughtfully. "After hearing Clara talk about Amelia, I realize that the people we've lost, they're not obstacles to new love. They're proof that we're capable of loving deeply, of being forever changed by connection." A sound from the house made them both look up. Clara stood at the window, gesturing for them to come inside. The snow was falling harder now, and the temperature had dropped considerably. As they stood, Nathaniel took one last look at the garden. In the spring, he knew there would be flowers here, new life growing in the place where his sister's life had ended. There was a metaphor in that. He thought something about how endings and beginnings were really just different parts of the same cycle. Inside, warmth and the smell of cooking enveloped them. Clara took the snow-dampened quilt, replacing it with warm towels fresh from the dryer. "Dinner's almost ready," she announced. "I hope you both like my famous gumbo." "Clara's gumbo is legendary in 3 counties," Eleanor said, rubbing her towel over her hair. "She only makes it for special occasions." "And this is certainly special," Clara said, looking between them with knowing eyes. "Love blooming in my garden on a snow day, that's worth celebrating." Nathaniel felt his cheeks warm, but not from embarrassment. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not just his pain and loss, but his capacity for joy and love as well. "Eleanor," Clara called from the kitchen, "come help me with the cornbread." "Nathaniel, baby, there's a photo album on the shelf. I think you should see while we finish up." As Eleanor followed her grandmother to the kitchen, casting a warm glance over her shoulder, Nathaniel found the album Clara had mentioned. It was newer than the others, its cover reading "Garden Visitors" in Clara's elegant handwriting. Inside, he found photos of people sitting on the memorial bench, some smiling, some crying, all looking peaceful. On the last page was a note in Clara's hand. "Every soul who finds their way to this garden brings their own story of love and loss. Each one leaves a piece of their heart here and takes a piece of healing with them." Nathaniel touched the words gently, understanding now that he wasn't just here to learn about Amelia's last moments. He was here to learn how to carry her memory forward into a new life, a life that, somehow, impossibly, wonderfully, seemed to include both Clara's wisdom and Eleanor's love. From the kitchen, he could hear the 2 women laughing about something, their voices harmonizing in a way that made his heart feel full. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Maple Street in a blanket of pure white, nature's way of saying that sometimes you get to start fresh without erasing what came before. Sunday morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it the reality of their impending return to Boston. Nathaniel woke early in the guest room of Clara's Victorian home, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling. Through the window, he could see the garden bench, still dusted with snow, now glittering in the early morning light. The past day had been filled with stories. Clara sharing memories of her life in Winchester, Eleanor recounting childhood visits to the Yellow House, and Nathaniel finally feeling strong enough to tell them about the Amelia he'd known growing up. Each story had been a thread, weaving them all closer together. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Clara with her usual morning tea. Instead, Eleanor slipped inside, already dressed in jeans and a white sweater. "Morning," she whispered, settling on the edge of his bed. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in years," Nathaniel admitted, sitting up. "Though I'm not ready to leave." "Me neither." Eleanor's hand found his atop the covers. "But I've been thinking about something about us, and what happens when we get back." "Back to Boston," Nathaniel finished for her. "Everything's going to be different now," she said carefully. "We won't have the bubble of this house, of Clara's wisdom, of the garden. We'll have work and responsibilities and reality." Nathaniel felt his heart rate increase. "And you need to know, are you ready for that? For real life with all its complications? Because what's growing between us?" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It's beautiful and precious, but it's also delicate. I don't want to break it by rushing into the deep end." Nathaniel sat up straighter, taking both her hands in his. "Eleanor, before we came here, I was afraid of exactly that, of reality, intruding on what we were building. But now," he gestured toward the window, toward the garden beyond. "Now I understand something I've been missing for 10 years. Real life isn't about avoiding pain or protecting yourself from loss. It's about embracing every moment, every connection, even knowing they might end." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "That sounds like something Clara would say." "She's a wise woman," Nathaniel smiled. "But it's more than that. Being here, learning about Amelia's last moments, seeing how your grandmother has honored her memory while still living fully, it's shown me what I've been doing wrong. I've been existing, not living. And now I want to live, really live, like Amelia wanted me to. And I want to do it with you." He squeezed her hands. "I know it won't be easy. We'll have to figure out how to blend our lives, how to handle our different work schedules, how to deal with the looks some people might give us. Because I'm black, and you're white," Eleanor asked directly. "Yes," Nathaniel acknowledged. "I'd be naive to pretend that won't be a factor. But Eleanor, when I look at you, I don't see color first. I see the woman who's teaching me how to love again, how to live again. My grandmother would say that's exactly how it should be." Eleanor smiled. "But Nathaniel, loving across racial lines isn't about being colorblind. It's about seeing and celebrating our differences while recognizing our common humanity." "Then teach me," Nathaniel said earnestly. "Help me understand your experiences, your perspective. I want to learn, to grow, to be worthy of what we're building." Eleanor leaned forward, kissing him softly. "You already are," she whispered against his lips. A knock at the door made them jump apart like teenagers. Clara's voice carried through the wood. "Breakfast in 15 minutes, you two. And yes, I know you're both in there." They laughed, the serious moment breaking into comfortable warmth. As Eleanor stood to leave, Nathaniel caught her hand. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. Eleanor's eyes widened. "What?" "Or I'll move in with you. Or we'll find a new place together. I don't want to do this halfway. I've spent too many years playing it safe." "Nathaniel," Eleanor said carefully, "that's a big step. I know. And if you think it's too soon, I understand. But I also know that when I'm with you, everything makes sense. Everything feels right in a way nothing has for 10 years. Eleanor sat back down, her expression thoughtful. "My lease is up in 2 months, she said slowly. "Mine too, actually," Nathaniel realized. "In March. So maybe," Eleanor's eyes took on a playful gleam, "we spend these 2 months really getting to know each other in Boston, dating properly, learning each other's habits and quirks. And if by March we still feel this way, we find our own place," Nathaniel finished. Together, Eleanor agreed. "But Nathaniel, I have one condition. Anything. We have to come back here regularly. Clara would never forgive us if we didn't." "I was already planning on it," Nathaniel smiled. "Your grandmother, she's family now. The only family I have left, really." "Not the only family," Eleanor corrected softly. "Not anymore." Their second kiss was interrupted by Clara's voice from downstairs. "Don't make me come up there, you two. These biscuits won't eat themselves." They descended to the kitchen hand in hand, finding Clara at the stove, humming as she worked. The table was set for three, with a fresh bouquet of winter flowers in the center. "Sit, sit," Clara instructed, bringing over a plate piled high with biscuits. "We need to talk about your drive back and about when you're coming to visit again." She paused, studying their linked hands and glowing faces. "Though something tells me I won't have to wait too long." Over breakfast, they discussed practical matters, their flight time, the weather forecast, the best route back to Dulles. But beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of excitement, of possibility. Nathaniel caught Eleanor's eye across the table and saw his own feelings reflected there. They were on the cusp of something extraordinary. As they prepared to leave, Clara pulled Nathaniel aside while Eleanor packed the car. "You remember what Amelia's last message was?" she asked softly. "To keep living," Nathaniel nodded. "Really living." "Look at my granddaughter," Clara said, her eyes fierce with love. "Really look at her. That's what really living looks like. That's what love looks like when it's not afraid of depth, of complexity, of growth." "I see her," Nathaniel assured her. "I see all of her." "Good." Clara patted his cheek. "Then go build something beautiful together." And Nathaniel, her voice took on a teasing note, "when you two finally decide to move in together, I expect to help decorate." Nathaniel laughed, unsurprised by her intuition. "We'll need someone to tell us where to hang the yellow quilt." "Oh no, baby," Clara smiled. "That quilt has one more journey to make before it finds its final home. But we'll talk about that next time you visit." Before Nathaniel could ask what she meant, Eleanor called from the car. It was time to go. As they drove away from the yellow Victorian, Nathaniel watched in the rearview mirror as Clara stood on her porch, waving until they turned the corner. "Ready to go home?" Eleanor asked, her hand finding his across the center console. Nathaniel smiled, realizing that home had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just his apartment in Boston anymore. Home was wherever this remarkable woman was, wherever their shared story was unfolding. "Ready," he said, squeezing her hand, "for everything." The first week back in Boston felt like waking from a dream, except the reality was better than any dream Nathaniel had known in years. He and Eleanor fell into a rhythm that felt both new and perfectly natural. Morning coffee dates before work, lunch breaks, spent apartment hunting online, evening walks along the Charles River where their story had begun. On a particularly cold Tuesday evening, Nathaniel sat at his desk, staring at a blank document on his computer screen. The cursor blinked expectantly, waiting for words he hadn't dared write in a decade. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Found another possibility on Marlborough Street. 3 bedrooms, garden level. Want to see it tomorrow?" His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but instead of responding immediately, he began to type something else. Some stories begin at the end of other stories. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. Amelia taught me that, though it took me 10 years and an extraordinary woman to understand the lesson. The words flowed easily now, unlike the stilted attempts of his 20s. He was halfway through the first chapter when another text arrived. "You're unusually quiet tonight. Everything okay?" Nathaniel smiled, saving his work before calling her instead of texting back. She answered on the first ring. "I'm writing again," he said without preamble. The joy in Eleanor's voice was palpable. "The novel? A new one. About loss and finding love again. About how some connections transcend time and space. About a woman who makes quilts that heal broken hearts." "Clara will love that," Eleanor said softly. "Are you sure you're ready?" "I've never been more ready for anything," Nathaniel replied, "except maybe finding that apartment with you." About that, Eleanor's tone shifted slightly. "The Marlborough Street place, it's perfect, Nathaniel. 3 bedrooms, like we talked about. One for us, one for your office, one for guests. A small garden, walking distance to both our offices. But, it's at the very top of our budget. We'd be stretching ourselves thin." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, looking at the manuscript beginning to take shape on his screen. "Maybe it's time to stretch, to take risks, to believe in what we're building." "You sound like Clara," Eleanor laughed. "Good. She's the wisest person I know." Nathaniel paused, gathering his thoughts. "Eleanor, do you remember what you said about running forward still being running?" "Yes. I've been thinking about that, about how I've been using financial security as another form of running, always playing it safe, always choosing the practical option. But what if we chose differently this time? What if we chose the place that feels like home, even if it means tightening our belts for a while." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Eleanor said, "Come over now. We should talk about this in person." 20 minutes later, Nathaniel stood in Eleanor's kitchen, watching her make tea. The yellow quilt lay draped over her couch. She'd insisted on keeping it at her place until they moved in together, saying it needed a woman's touch to keep it properly preserved. "I got a call from my firm today," Eleanor said, handing him a steaming mug. "They're making me head of the pro bono division." Nathaniel's face lit up. "Eleanor, that's amazing. It's what you've always wanted." "It is," she agreed, leading him to the couch. "But it comes with a pay cut. Pro bono work doesn't generate billable hours." Nathaniel understood now why she'd been concerned about the apartment budget. "I want to take it," Eleanor continued. "It's a chance to make real change, to help people who truly need legal representation. But if we're going to get the Marlborough Street place, I'll need to make up the difference." Nathaniel took her hand. "You're not asking. I'm offering. More than that, I have an idea. What if I quit consulting?" Eleanor nearly spilled her tea. "What? Hear me out. I've been writing every night this week. The story, it's just pouring out of me. And I have savings, enough to support us for a year, even if we get the Marlborough Street place. What if I took that time to finish the novel, to finally pursue the dream I gave up on 10 years ago?" "Nathaniel," Eleanor set down her mug carefully. "That's a huge risk. I know. But being with you, meeting Clara, learning about Amelia's last moments, it's all shown me that the biggest risk is not living authentically, not following your heart." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she reached for her laptop, opening it to reveal a familiar listing. "The apartment has original hardwood floors," she said slowly, "and built-in bookshelves in what would be your office." Nathaniel's heart soared. "Is that a yes?" "It's a show me what you've written so far," Eleanor countered. "If you're really going to do this, I want to be part of it. I want to understand the story you're trying to tell." Nathaniel pulled out his phone, forwarding her the document he'd been working on. As she read, he watched her face, seeing tears form in her eyes at certain passages. "This is beautiful," she whispered finally. "It's real and raw and honest. It's you." "It's us," Nathaniel corrected. "Our story, woven together with Amelia's and Clara's, a tapestry of love and loss and healing." Eleanor closed the laptop and turned to face him fully. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it. All of it. The apartment, your novel, my new position. Let's take the leap together." Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with love for this woman who understood him so completely. "I'll call the real estate agent in the morning." "No need," Eleanor smiled against his chest. "I already scheduled a viewing for tomorrow at noon. I knew you'd say yes. Pretty confident, counselor." "No," she pulled back to look at him. "Just certain that some things are meant to be. Clara taught me that." Nathaniel glanced at the yellow quilt, thinking about all the twists and turns that had led them here. "Speaking of Clara, we should call her. Tell her about the apartment, about your new position, about the novel." "Already did," Eleanor admitted. "She said to tell you she's already planning the housewarming party." And Nathaniel, her eyes sparkled with amusement, "She said to make sure your office has good light." Apparently, writers need natural light to create their best work. Nathaniel laughed, but his heart swelled with gratitude for the family he'd unexpectedly found. Clara's wisdom, Eleanor's love, and Amelia's memory, all of it was weaving together into something beautiful and new. As they sat on Eleanor's couch, planning their future and sharing their dreams, the yellow quilt wrapped around their shoulders like a blessing. Nathaniel realized that this was what Amelia had meant in her final message. This was really living, taking chances, following your heart, building something meaningful with someone who understood your soul. Tomorrow, they would view the apartment, begin the practical steps of merging their lives. But tonight was for dreaming, for believing in the power of love to transform endings into beginnings, for trusting that some stories were worth every risk it took to tell them. Spring bloomed in Boston, painting the city in shades of renewal. Cherry blossoms lined Commonwealth Avenue, their delicate petals drifting on the breeze like nature's confetti. In the garden-level apartment on Marlborough Street, Nathaniel sat at his desk, typing the final words of his novel as morning light streamed through the bay windows. The yellow quilt had found its final home, hanging on the wall of their bedroom, a testament to the way love could bridge time, space, and loss. Some stories end where they begin, with two people finding each other across a crowded room. With a grandmother's wisdom, with a sister's last wish, for her brother to truly live. This was such a story. He sat back, feeling the weight of completion settle over him. The manuscript had poured out of him over the past 3 months, as if Amelia, Clara, and Eleanor had been guiding his fingers on the keyboard. Outside his office, he heard the front door open and close. "Nathaniel," Eleanor's voice called out, "are you ready?" Today was moving day, not for them, but for Clara. After much discussion and planning, she had decided to sell the yellow Victorian in Winchester and move to Boston. The garden would become a public memorial space, maintained by a local foundation, ensuring that its healing presence would continue to touch lives. "Just finished," Nathaniel replied, saving the document and emerging from his office. Eleanor stood in their living room, looking radiant in a spring dress, her natural curls crowned with a colorful head wrap, a style she'd adopted after Clara mentioned it, reminded her of her own mother. "The novel?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "Really finished?" Nathaniel nodded, pulling her into an embrace. "Really finished. All it needs now is Clara's approval. She'll love it," Eleanor assured him, kissing him softly. "But right now, we need to get to the airport. Her flight lands in an hour." The drive to Logan was filled with excited conversation about Clara's impending arrival. They had found her a perfect apartment in a senior living community, just 3 blocks from their home, close enough for daily visits, but independent enough to maintain her autonomy. "Daniel called this morning," Eleanor mentioned as they parked. "He's still taking credit for all of this, you know." Nathaniel laughed. "Well, he did set us up on that New Year's Eve blind date." "True, but I don't think even Daniel could have predicted how perfectly everything would unfold." They made their way to the arrivals area, finding Clara's flight already landed. When she emerged through the security doors, she looked exactly as she had that first day in Winchester, regal in a purple dress, silver hair wrapped elegantly, and a knowing smile that suggested she had seen this moment coming all along. "My children," she exclaimed, embracing them both at once. "Ready to start our new chapter?" The drive to Clara's new apartment was full of joy and plans. She had already shipped most of her belongings ahead, and the place was fully furnished, waiting only for her personal touches to make it home. "Before we head there," Clara said from the back seat, "I need to make a stop." Nathaniel caught her eye in the rearview mirror, understanding immediately. "The garden." "Our garden," Clara corrected gently. "I have something to show you both." They parked outside their apartment, and Clara led them through the small gate into their garden-level outdoor space. Over the past months, they had transformed it, with roses, herbs, and a small bench reminiscent of the one in Winchester. Clara pulled an envelope from her purse. "I received this yesterday," she said, handing it to Nathaniel, "from the Winchester Historical Society." Inside was a letter confirming that the garden at the Yellow Victorian had been officially designated as the Amelia and Julian Memorial Garden, along with a photo of the new plaque that would mark its entrance. "You did this," Eleanor whispered, tears in her eyes. "We all did," Clara replied, "by loving each other, by healing together, by understanding that every ending can become a beginning if we're brave enough to let it." Nathaniel sat on their garden bench, overwhelmed by emotion. Eleanor settled beside him, and Clara took her place on his other side. "I have something for you too," Nathaniel said, pulling out a printed copy of his manuscript. "The first copy. I want you both to read it before anyone else does." Clara took the manuscript reverently, running her fingers over the title page, "The Yellow Quilt." "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I made that quilt 40 years ago, I never imagined the journey it would take, how it would connect lives, heal hearts, bring families together. Like this garden," Eleanor added, looking around at their small but flourishing space. "A piece of Winchester in Boston." "More than that," Clara corrected. "A new place for new memories." Speaking of which, she reached into her purse again, pulling out a small box. "I have something for you too." Inside was a key on a handmade quilted keychain. "To my apartment," Clara explained, "for when the baby comes." Nathaniel and Eleanor exchanged startled looks. "Clara," Eleanor said carefully, "we haven't told anyone yet." "How did you, child? Please." Clara laughed. "I knew the moment you switched from coffee to tea last week." "A grandmother knows these things." Nathaniel pulled Eleanor closer, his hand instinctively moving to rest on her still flat stomach. They had only confirmed the pregnancy 2 days ago, planning to announce it once Clara was settled. "Amelia would be so happy," Clara said softly, placing her hand over theirs. "A new life, a new story beginning." This is what she meant when she told you to keep living, Nathaniel. This is what Julian would have wanted for you. Eleanor, love blooming again. Family growing stronger. The spring breeze carried the scent of roses through their small garden, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. Nathaniel looked at these two extraordinary women, his wife-to-be, and the grandmother who had helped heal his heart, and felt complete in a way he'd never thought possible. The baby's middle name, he said suddenly. If it's a girl, what do you think about Clara, Amelia Clara? Or Julian, Clara for a boy? Eleanor added softly. Clara's eyes filled with tears of joy. I think, she said, pulling them both close, that love has a way of coming full circle, and that this circle, this family we've built, is more beautiful than any of us could have imagined. They sat together in their garden, 3 generations connected by loss and love, watching as the spring sun painted everything in shades of possibility. The yellow quilt hung in their bedroom window above, catching the light and casting golden shadows over their small sanctuary. Some stories, Nathaniel realized, don't really end. They just transform, like seasons changing, like love growing, like life itself, always moving, always renewing, always finding new ways to bloom. Their story had begun with a blind date on New Year's Eve, but it would continue through their child, through Clara's wisdom, through the gardens in Winchester and Boston, through all the moments of joy and challenge that lay ahead. And somewhere, he was certain, Amelia was smiling, knowing that her final wish had been granted in ways more wonderful than anyone could have imagined. Her brother wasn't just living, he was loving, growing, healing, and building a future filled with the kind of connections that transcend time and space. Really living indeed.